Hello, everyone, and welcome here. It's nice to see folks in person. I'm usually working remotely, so it's nice to come in and see faces that I've been corresponding with via email. This is the Experiential Learning Colloquium for the 2023-24 round of grant funding. And yeah, so it's great to see everyone here. I first just wanted to acknowledge that we're gathered on ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory, and these lands are the heartland of the Métis people. And we acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake First Nation, and that our power is sourced from 5 territory. And I feel like this is just especially important to mention, given that many of the experiential learning projects and student opportunities at UW do happen because of and alongside Indigenous communities who invite staff and students into their communities for hands-on learning. So yeah, I also wanted to mention that the Experiential Learning Network has been around at UW since around 2008, and that the corresponding EL fund has been around since 2012-2013. And this past round that we're sharing projects from today will mark 11 years of the fund being in place. And it's just meant to provide resources for experiential learning courses and project initiatives here at UW, very much before terms like work integrated and community-based hands-on learning were more common practice in post-secondary institutions, and especially in courses for art students where the fund is housed. And yeah, this all happened just because a group of really inspired educators saw a need for this kind of learning and wanted to do something to make that happen for students. So yeah, this colloquium will highlight some of the kinds of work and projects being done across all faculties at the UW in an experiential or hands-on learning capacity, and will hopefully provide folks with some insight and inspiration regarding what experiential learning can look like out of these different departments and faculties. So we have 8 different presenter groups today, and each team will have maybe 8 to 10 minutes to talk about their EL-funded project, tell us what they're working on, and then there should be time for a couple questions after each team presents. So without further ado, our first presenter is Emma Alexander from the Faculty of Arts, and she will be speaking about experiencing global South Asian history and culture in Winnipeg. So I will hand this over to Emma.
Okay, so my project for experiential learning in 2023, and actually it's continuing this year. And the reason that I'm presenting first is that I have to dash across the hall at 1 o'clock to continue teaching the same course, in fact. So my course, the project is called Experiencing Global South Asian History and Culture in Winnipeg. And now I'll explain a little bit about the course that it goes with. The course is called History 3118. It's a world history course. Okay, it's not just a South Asia course that basically discusses many aspects of the South Asian diaspora, in other words, the scattering of people from South Asia in this course since 1800, although of course people have been moving out of the subcontinent for far longer than that, right? So we are going to, in this course, we talk about movement to Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, South America, North America, and Europe. Yes, all in fact, a condensed period of 5 weeks. Well, it depends on the year, because I've been teaching this course off and on since 2011, okay? And 2023 was the first time that I'd applied for a experiential learning grant, okay? So I've done various things, various modules. I choose from these ones. Basically, we start out by doing the 18th, 19th, and 19th century travelers to Europe from British India, who consisted of either high status people, in other words, princes, diplomats, those who had the funds to travel, and basically the lower caste and lower status people who served them, right? Ayahs, that's nursemaids for children, servants, Lascars, who were sailors, right? These were the people who traveled in the 19th century. And in fact, we don't meet so many of them in Winnipeg, obviously, although there are, interestingly, some descendants of high status people here in Winnipeg. But where I really start with experiential learning is relating to merchant communities, okay? And so I'm going to go and show you how I've related each one of these, what looks like basically, the historical data about each one of these different migrations to Winnipeg. How do I do that? Well, because we can see in Winnipeg, right, each one of these migrations. Okay, we have people who are descended from merchants who came across the Indian Ocean to Africa, largely from Gujarat in Western India, from as early as the 14th century, but certainly for people whose ancestors went in the 18th century. We have people who are descended from indentured labor migrants, right? And I'm going to tell you a bit more about that. We have people who were expelled by Idi Amin from Uganda, many of them here in Winnipeg, right? We have particularly Punjabis who were involved with, and their descendants who were involved with the revolutionary Gadda movement, which occurred in the early first decade of the 20th century and the second decade of the 20th century. And you may know about the Komagatu Maru incident in Vancouver, where a ship from India was not allowed to disembark, right? And then I finished the course by talking about post-war and post-partition. That means the division of India into India and Pakistan in 1947, migrations to the UK, and then to North America. So that's how the course is sort of divided, right? But what my point about Winnipeg is that people from every single one of these migrations to other places in the world have ended up here in Winnipeg, okay? So I introduced my students to my friend Girish. He is at Gagan Fruits, which is along there on Ellis, okay? He has an extraordinary story, okay? His grandfather moved from Karachi to Somalia, to Mogadishu, okay? And his father built a large business in Mogadishu, but in the late 80s, they were basically chased out of Mogadishu. They didn't have the right, as some other South Asians did, to move to the UK or Canada, right? They ended up, well, first of all, in Kenya, then in Uganda, after Idi Amin had kicked out Indians, okay? And then eventually he joined his brother in Winnipeg. That's the story in brief, right? On the right is Yusuf Abdulrahman. He is the owner of the Halal Meat Center on Maryland, which you may know. It's a very obvious landmark of South Asia in Winnipeg, right? He is from, not India, but Zanzibar, okay? An island off the coast of East Africa, off the coast of what is today Tanzania, okay, or Tanzania. And his ancestors came to Tanzania, basically, or Zanzibar, 4 generations earlier, right? So he is an example of those merchant communities, right? And he's lived in Winnipeg since 1974, when the government of then united Zanzibar and Tanzania basically decided to go for a policy of Africanization, and South Asians felt like they no longer had a place there, right?
Did you want to show any of your videos? Or you
I think I'm going to run out of time.
Perfect. Okay. All right.
Okay, moving quickly on. Indentured migration and its legacies. So here I am lecturing in the studio that's across there, because this course is both online and in person, okay? And I invite the in-person students to go on experiential learning opportunities, and I also invite the online students if they're available, right? Here I am lecturing about the manifest of the ship, the Fatal Razak. The Fatal Razak left India, or Kolkata, in 1845 and arrived 3.5 months later or so in Trinidad, okay? And was the first ship of Indian migrants. This manifest, showing all the names of the migrants who came, is actually on display at the Piarco International Airport in Trinidad, at Port of Spain, right? And on the right is a photograph of, from the National Archives of Trinidad and Tobago, of indentured migrants. But how do you show students today in Winnipeg, right, what that experience of indenture, which was close to slavery, was like? Well, you introduce them to this man, okay, Peter Jailal. Peter Jailal's not from Winnipeg, actually, but he's from Toronto, and I brought him specially for this visit, okay? He is a poet and a teacher, okay? He entranced the students with his poems and stories and his humanity, right? And he humanized the story of the indentured laborers for the students in a way that I cannot. Here are the two of the students reading his poems in the class. Peter also performed, literally, this is him, a day later, performing at Indian Arrival Day, which, for various reasons that I won't explain right now, I actually ended up organizing with my good friend, Kamtaroy Singh, who's there on the left. Kamtaroy Singh is an entrepreneur here in Winnipeg. He owns multiple Tim Hortons. He's from Guyana. He is descended from indentured laborers, as is Peter Jailal. Okay, Kamtaroy's from Winnipeg, right? But basically, Kamtaroy and Derek Dabi and various other members of the community and I organized Indian Arrival Day community celebration, which was attended by members of the community and by my students, right? And we filmed it. This is what I should mention. We filmed these things using the UW film crew, which actually, and I should mention this for every experiential learning person, you can do this without cost. Okay, so actually I was able to save on those costs. So we had an extraordinary time. It took, I think the Indian Arrival Day celebration lasted for at least 2.5 hours. Okay. It included Peter's poetry, it included dances and songs and celebration. Extraordinarily, the Indians who arrived in Trinidad and Guyana in particular celebrate, interestingly, and perhaps in a contradictory way, their arrival in the Caribbean. In fact, their escape from, well, basically the difficulties of living in 19th century India, right? And this is, yeah, a contradictory aspect, which some of the students, but this is why I introduced them and organized this Indian Arrival Day celebration in conjunction with the community who weren't going to hold it just after COVID, because basically, I wanted them to understand that, yes, while the history of indenture is really difficult, in fact, people have thrived and are incredibly resilient, and that is this history of resilience, right, that they are celebrating. We're also celebrating the very interesting history of Indian nationalism outside India. Okay, and that's the interesting aspect of this, is that Indian nationalists didn't just operate in India, they operated outside of India, largely because the British colonial government clamped down on them so heavily within India, right? So one of the incidents, now there was the Revolutionary Gada movement, which was a socialist movement, basically an anarchist movement at times, was based in San Francisco, in Washington State, and in British Columbia, okay? And part of that movement actually was the arrival of the Komagatuwaru ship from, well, it had taken on board its migrants in Kolkata, but it had stopped in Hong Kong on the way, right? And when it arrived in Vancouver, the colonial Canadian authorities would not allow the ship to land and to disembark its passengers, because they had put into place this rule that said you could only come directly. Well, you can't come directly, right? So we learned about, and the way that I did this in terms of experiential learning is I lectured on what had happened in San Francisco and in Washington State. And then I also explained what had happened here, right? In other words, how people here understood this history in British Columbia and what connections they had to it. And we partly did this by going to visit one of the Gurdwaras, one of the Sikh temples. This photograph is from the Sikh temple, where we can see that people from that era were actually being commemorated here in Winnipeg, right? So this is our visit to the Gurdwara Singh Sabha, which is on Sturgeon Road, okay, where students learned, one of them had a turban tied, right? Jesse Panu, who's up on the right, explained many aspects of Sikh culture in Winnipeg and Sikh culture generally. We heard some absolutely amazing music, right? Some hymns. And then we also talked to the elders and some elders in the community. And that's one of the things I wanted to play for you, but I am out of time. Okay, our last experiential, well, there was another one, but our last major experiential activity was to have a meal at the East India Company restaurant, which most people in Winnipeg have heard of, right? What did we do there? Well, actually, we had our class discussion there. And what we did also was we ate the food. We discussed, after having read about articles about food in restaurants in Britain, we discussed how different Indian restaurants in Canada were from Indian restaurants in India, right? And also in Britain. With some very interesting discussion, including with Mrs. Mehra, who's the owner of the restaurant, who came to Winnipeg in the 1960s. And that's partly why I took the students there to experience the history, right, of Winnipeg Indian restaurants. Okay, and I'm going to introduce you to Christian, who I should have introduced you to at the beginning. Yes, please come up. Yeah, Christian was one of my students in this course. Yeah, that's Christian Goulet.
Hello.
Yeah, and he can tell you a little bit about some of these experiential activities, although he experienced them as an online student.
Yeah, yes. So actually, this was the last course, the last requirement to graduate. So it's a nice cap to my studies in history at the UW. So yeah, being an online student, my experience was participating through Nexus and through Panopto, watching videos and then working with the online documents. So it was a little bit different than I'm sure than the folks who had the in-person experience. But being able to watch those videos, to see people, to see the mannerisms, the reactions, to see the students asking questions, it was very much like I was there. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to be in person in the course, but I would have liked to, I think. We did, like Dr. Alexander said, we saw stores, Gurdwara, we went to restaurants, and I guess what I wanted to say specifically was that I had to follow up in person on some of the restaurant visits because the reactions of the people in the videos to the food. I'm also very food motivated. So my blog post, not surprisingly, was about Indian restaurants in a global context and looking at how, and I apologize for any of my mispronunciations, but how influences across the world affect which restaurants end up where. And, you know, a popular Indian restaurant in Winnipeg might be very much based on food from a certain region of India, like Punjab, right? And so you don't necessarily see some of the other regions reflected in Canada, maybe more so now, a little bit in Europe, there's some things popping up. But the specific one that I was looking at was doubles. And if anybody's had doubles, right, they're amazing. They have a huge history behind them. And so they are part of the cultural identity of the emigration to the Caribbean, right? So that first Indian immigration after slavery ended, well, after the British banned slavery, they turned to an almost as awful system of indentured to slavery or indentured workers. So those folks that came over to the Caribbean, they were isolated. And so they were isolated from like their traditional ingredients, chickpeas and cilantro, things like that didn't grow natively in the Caribbean. So they adapted their recipes and they adapted all kinds of things. Other parts of their culture were fiercely guarded and defended, right? So you have a really interesting reimagining of Indian identity that's taking place in the Caribbean over 200 years. And then, you know, what's happening in India. And so there was an author that really influenced me in this blog post, Peter Manuel, and he described he described Indian identity as being made and remade. It's a push and a pull, it's fluid, and it's ever changing. And it's really focused on, you know, he looked at music and food and language, but there's these pockets of sort of cultural export of the sort of centers of these cultures, and they all push and pull, and eventually, you know, you have this ever-changing system. So for me, that was really fascinating. my own identity. I'm a Red River Métis, and we're not all just like fiddles and sashes. But if you saw, any marketing, it's like the Métis are always just like that. That's a Métis, right? So it's trying to understand all those different changes and pushes and pulls and what is, identity and what there is no single thing, right? It's very unique and personal experience. But that's what I explored in the blog posts, and I think I've run out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and as you can see, Chris Johnson, one of the best blog posts that I have. So just thank you very much. Thank you for the
and class. And thank you for coming to our presentation today. I would love to introduce to you my students, my co-learners, Summer Ways, Madeline Timmons, Jessica Daniels, and Karen St. Marie. And we are going to be talking to you today about the experiences we've had during a developmental studies course on early literacy and early numeracy development. So when I first started the course, and it's the second time I've taught the course, it's a new course in developmental studies because we want to get the message across to people that it's really important to engage in early literacy and numeracy skills at this age and younger, all the way up. And so research has suggested that children who have a good start to these principles have a good start to life. So it doesn't start at age 5. So the goal of the course was to expose this type of research, to create locally and educationally, culturally relevant materials, learn about teaching literacy and numeracy. And I had an assignment that I threw in for the second time, but I actually went forward on it this time, which was to write and illustrate a book incorporating some of the things that we had learned in the course. So in terms of funding, the funding that we received was used to have a children's author come and visit the class to talk about how to write a book and the things to look at. We wanted to visit local places to see how materials are presented to children. So we went to the library, we went to the Manitoba Museum, and a lot of the money is still being held because we're publishing, you'll see a book, and illustrator costs because we needed some of the drawings to come for the book, although one person in the class, instead of writing a book, chose to illustrate. So that was kind of cool to see that diversity happening. And then, of course, food for meetings. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hear from each of the 4 students about what their take was on the course and how this course affected how this course was influenced by an experiential learning grant. So we will start first with Madeline.
Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Madeline. I'm an honors psychology student, and I'm focusing a lot on my thesis on numeracy development and the brain. So I really was interested in this course, particularly because it's about numeracy and early literacy. And so as a psychology student, I know a lot about the research, a lot about the theoretical aspects of how children learn. And I thought this class was specifically useful at looking at how, educators and early childhood educators and parents are integrating some of this. And so it was interesting to see how the theory is being applied in school settings and kind of learning how are we going to bridge that gap. So in psych, we have a lot of, research experience, we have a lot of data collection, and we have specific ways that we see things. And then on the education side of it, teachers are really hands-on. They're teaching and showing children how to use numeracy and literacy very differently than maybe the theoretical aspects of what's going on. So I kind of look at it on how can we bridge these two things together and bring psychology and then the educational perspective and kind of bridge that. And so this class really highlighted that for me and showed just the ways that teachers are actually talking about numeracy, maybe ways that the psych aspect can kind of improve this with the theory that backs why children are learning this way. And yeah, I just thought it's really interesting and has a lot of future implications for how people are going to work with children going forwards.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, next up is Karen. And maybe you can just mention like a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have the honor and privilege of being the director of Makuseg Intergenerational Children's Center. Our elder Stella Blackford had the vision of having our children close by their parents who were attending post-secondary institutes and training in and around the North End. So for experiential learning, what took me a bit by surprise and a little bit of an aha moment was hearing the author talk about the specific roles that working through a storybook project had on the impact of that end project. And so we thought, okay, the roles that you play, and you think, okay, there's going to be someone that enjoys, a certain development or part of what it is that the story brings, but then working with other students on the development of the storybook, it really helped solidify some of that information the author had given us. They had given us real information about everyone is going to need to define their role. If you're sitting at a distance, you're not going to be able to do that. You need to delve into it and have conflict resolution, problem solving, all the pieces that come in group project. But when you're working online, it's a little bit more challenging. So one of the things was Google Docs and editing our storybook, and all of a sudden someone goes in and changes and you're taking this so personally. It's like, no, these are the reasons why. So that experiential learning really supported some of those challenges we saw. Thinking about our staff and some of the work that we do with our children, embedding literacy and numeracy into our everyday. My learning came when we attended the Manitoba Museum, and it's a beautiful space and lots of great information, but many of our families as students just aren't taking that time or have the ability to take the time to go on to some of these field trips. So think about how when you're going on the bus, when you're thinking about your everyday life, you may not think about the opportunities. So having our staff, and I gifted this over to our staff and they ran with it, is having our staff be able to take that information and help our families. So an example of that is one of our staff who is just reclaiming their language, talked about speaking in Ojibwe to a family member who is learning Ojibwe themselves and looking at different numbers on the bus that they're going home. So it didn't have to be this big field trip. It needed to be those personal connections that are going to make all of the information and the data and the research really relevant to that family. So as that family is reclaiming their language, they're thinking about literacy and numeracy and in their everyday life. So identifying the letter C and what word would they know in Ojibwe or Cree in some of the areas that they see in their walk home, in their bus ride. So being able to acknowledge our educators already have that experience or understanding, but then also what they do with that is really highlight the strengths of our families. And I just want to say, our North End is a vital part of our city, and we really need to be able to highlight all the really great positive things that are coming. We were part of that little corner, if you're familiar with Merchants Corner, and our elder being part of that vision as well. So really ensuring that literacy and numeracy are the pieces that help our families succeed.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, you're up, Summer. Hi, I'm Summer.
Maybe move over there.
So, I just put some notes. So, yeah, first of all, I want to thank our Professor Sherry and Paul and the university for the grant and this opportunity. So, during this class, we visited the Millennium Library. It was a really fun experience. And when we visited, we were looking at the language books, and I noticed there were two sections for Urdu books. Urdu is a national language of Pakistan. It's also part of South India. So I noticed that those two sections were really small, really limited. The first section had the Urdu books, but just for beginners, nothing advanced. And the other section had books for English to Urdu translations. Those were also small words you can see on my face. When I was so happy to see this book. It has letters. So yeah, and so we wrote this book when I worked with my friend, and we added those Urdu words.
And tell them quickly about the Urdu word there.
Yeah.
That's actually wrong.
This is wrong.
I didn't change it. Yeah.
This is the first letter, this is second, and this is third. It is, I think,
Yeah.
just that mistakes. So we were able to tell about more languages. We added words in Urdu, also in French and Polish there with English. And I must say that Urdu language is also really important for, especially here in Winnipeg. It's a multicultural city, and we need to learn about this language as well. Yeah, and for the message, I would say, like, with this course, I learned a lot about numeracy and literacy.
There's your quote.
Oh, yeah, it goes hand in hand. Of course, as caregiver, we must focus on language learning and phonological skills using numbers and letters, encouraging creative activities and outdoor learning opportunities for healthy physical and mental health. So yeah, thank you so much.
We have Jessica, and you can. Bonjour, Anine Tansei. My name is Jessica Daniels, Dichnikas. Karen mentioned the reclaiming and relearning of my language, so thank you very much for creating a safe place for me to actually say my name. And my name is Asinisquet in Cree and Awio Asiniquet in Ojibwe, so I am reclaiming. I just want to thank Ningwech, Sherry, and Paul for the opportunity to be here today. And our course was just absolutely amazing. It was my first course that I ever attended in person. So going through COVID, having a toddler, he's 2, you know, it was really scary for me to be out there, right? Instead of behind the computer. So Sherry and Paul really created this inclusive atmosphere for us to learn. And I just want to mention, this is my storybook. I will be a published author, right? I hope I don't cry. But I didn't do this alone. I am from the Black Wolf clan, so of course the humility in that is we never work by ourselves, right? We are always a team. And I'd like to thank you again for creating that inclusive classroom, right? Because we all have something to bring to the table, and that's what I based my book on. It's called The Feast. And what it talks about is my own daughter's story, but our illustrator, Brian, is also Asian descent from the Philippines, and this is his story too. And you can see also Hattie and your beautiful daughter. That is her story too. When we are so far from our communities, how do we create that inclusive classroom so that everyone is included? And how do we help our Indigenous communities as being Indigenous? This is also my daughter's story. Always be a good friend. Your kindness teachings. When our child or our children are feeling hurt and lonely. I'm also, my mom's a 60 scoop, so I'm also that reclaiming my own resilience. That's the best way I can put it, of going through that intergenerational trauma of loneliness. So one of the things that I do talk about is how do we help our children feel safe? The children actually plan the feast. So again, that teacher is creating that inclusive classroom where the children are empowered. And you know what? The children start to learn that they're not so alone anymore, but they're not the only ones that are missing their home or their community. So they bring food. We talk about food today. They bring food to the feast that they make themselves. And we can't forget our prayer and that connection with Creator. So I made sure that we put in an actual smudge prayer. And I didn't do it alone. I have my other co-authors with me, Tammy, Debbie, and Santana, who really pushed everything together. And it was really difficult to do everything online. But again, with the support from Sherry, we would go into breakout rooms, We would talk about things with our illustrator. And then the experience going to the library was really awesome because like I said, I had never been in class before. And I haven't taken a university class in over 15 years. So for me to feel proud about my own learning is just really awesome. And I just want to mention the calls to action. Thank you very much, Sherry, for always including the calls to action because we are giving our children a voice, especially our Indigenous community. And one of the calls to action, especially UNDRIP, is the fact that we choose the way that we want to learn. So thank you very much. Thank you. And last but not least, I know we're over time, so I'll be very quick here that this field that we're in, early learning and childcare, is a growing field. There are so many connections to TRC with this class and with the group. The work that we still need to do, starting by creating our own materials, because not all of the languages, as you've heard, are mentioned and included in some of the resources we have. And so I just want to thank the UW Experiential Learning Fund for the opportunity to support this work. And I just want to say that I had no idea until we did this presentation how much learning occurred in so many different ways because we had a chance to talk about that. So even this presentation was very helpful. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much for organizing the forum today. I'm going to say a little bit on behalf of Walls to Bridges. Here at UWinnipeg, I'm Kevin from Criminal Justice. I'm part of Walls to Bridges, but it's a real team. Hope McIntyre from Theatre and Film is also a big part of Walls to Bridges and is here today. And I'm just going to say a little bit about what we've been up to the last couple of years, supported by the Experiential Learning Fund. So unlike some of the other presentations, the Experiential Learning Fund supported curricula development across multiple classes for Walls to Bridges. Some classes through MALT. I don't know if people know about MALT, administered by Colin Russell's office, but it's a great thing here at UWinnipeg. Theatre and Film, Criminal Justice, Urban and Inner City Studies. So Walls to Bridges spans arts. And in case you don't know what Walls to Bridges is, I'll say a little bit about that. So in the United States, it's called Inside Out. What we do is we go to carceral institutions, notably Stony Mountain Institution, but also Hope teaches a lot at Women's Correctional. And we have classes, usually 8 incarcerated students and 8 outside students. And we learn together in a circle. And the circle approach, people might be familiar with circle sharing, circle pedagogy, if you're familiar with that practice in Indigenous traditions, or you might be familiar with it from Quaker traditions, or you might be familiar with it from Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's all pretty similar. Like we sit in a circle and we tell our truth into the middle of the circle. There's no fixing, there's no saving, there's no setting each other straight. So you share your truth and you go to the next person and everyone shares. This is how we begin every class and this is how we end every class. But in the middle, there's a whole bunch of co-learning that happens in these different formations, or what we call transformations. Things like wagon wheel, things like improv-based theater exercises where people also get to share their story. So the students are really at the center of the learning process. In fact, a good Walls to Bridges class, Hope and I would hardly say anything at all. And the noise and the activity would be the students sharing and teaching one another. So you can have a class that addresses more content, like readings and examples, or you can run a class that's just totally unstructured using this Walls to Bridges approach. And students report a lot of the times that it's a very memorable experience for them, that they feel like they've been heard or made visible for the first time in their university careers. That's the inside and the outside students. We think Walls to Bridges is really important because it provides access to education for imprisoned or incarcerated peoples who a lot of times have been cut off from the education system. Sometimes people think that the experiential learning component of Walls to Bridges is people from the outside going to the inside, but I would say that's incorrect. We try to deter that voyeuristic mentality. In fact, the experiential learning component of it is when you're face to face, hearing someone's story, hearing someone's truth, and that resonates with you and you learn from it. So you can actually do this not simply in a carceral space, but in other kinds of institutional settings, halfway houses, John Howard, E-Fry. You could do them in almost any kind of setting where you have two people from two different paths, two groups of people from two different paths in life, and they come together and they teach one another about the roads that they've walked on. It's a kind of flipped classroom because we really want to start from people's experiences and people's interest in the class, and we build from there. So a lot of times Walsterbridge's classes, and maybe the curriculum committee doesn't like to hear this, but a lot of times Walsterbridge's classes don't have set outlines, set rubrics, instructions for things. We develop it together in the classroom. And then, yeah, there's some evaluation that happens, but it's all co-developed. Even the facilitator is learning throughout the process from the students. So, as I mentioned, Hope's class, Judith's classes, my classes have been in this Walsterbridge's style at Stony and Women's Correctional. And the Experiential Learning Fund has supported curricular development for those classes. And it's like an ongoing process across the program. Like I learn a lot from seeing what Hope does. Maybe Hope learns some from what Judith is doing and me. And so the curricular development happens across this like team of Walsterbridge's folks. Sometimes we have activities or evaluations in the class where the students design another kind of transformation. This kind of activity where people are learning from one another. So I've learned a lot from seeing what these students design in terms of what kinds of activities they would like to see that allow them to speak their truth and teach one another. And then last thing I'll say is we recently had a really awesome training at Stony. So we had a whole bunch of awesome folks from UWinnipeg and the community who came to learn how to facilitate in this Walsterbridge style. And the guys inside led a lot of the training. The co-facilitated sessions with Hope and I and Judith. So the guys inside end up becoming the full-fledged teachers or facilitators. And they all got certificates to, now they're like certified in how to train people in Walsterbridge's education. So it's not prof-led. It's ideally like the students in the class are really centered as the knowers, as the teachers at the end of the day. Thanks.
Okay, I should introduce myself first. Bonjour, Migas Dejnakas, Mashkate Bijake and Dodam. So my spirit name is Migas, which means shell. I am Scottish, English, and Irish and Czech descent. So I'm not Indigenous, but my Guime and adopted dad and mentor, Don Daniels from Long Plain First Nation, said whenever I'm talking about these things, I should always introduce myself by my spirit name. So that's what I did. And yeah, so this course here, I've been telling students for the past 30 years that, the best way to learn about Indigenous spirituality is not the classroom. It's an introduction. I always say you're on a beach, you pick up a grain of sand. That's what you're going to get from a classroom. You really need to get out and talk to the elders, go and experience the ceremonies and the teachings, listen to those traditional teachers, being on the land, and also paying attention to your dreams. So these are all important parts of the learning process. And, experiential learning employs a First Nations pedagogical approach that engages the whole self, mind, body, spirit, and emotions in the learning process. So this is a learning that, really requires a person to be in it in a big way, because it can get pretty emotional when you're dealing with all of these things, right? And so the experiential aspect starts in the classroom with daily smudging. Every day we begin our class with smudging. When you're smudging, you have sage going, and that smoke from the sage, you cleanse your mind, your body, your spirit, your emotions, and it creates a safe space for the work that we're going to be doing. And so then after smudging, we always have an opening sharing circle, and so we get to and it's a way of us getting to know each other. And it's a really important process. It actually helps create a great solidarity that we had a special group of students in this last one. And then, so that support of that bond is so important, and it helps, create that safe environment for us to do the next stage of work, which was our positionality. So our positionality, that's understanding and articulating one's positionality is an important part of the Indigenous pedagogy, as articulated by Kathleen Absalon from Indigenous Ways of Knowing in her book Kandasawin. And so positionality essentially consists of concerns important aspects of one's biography or life, essentially, as they relate to the topic. And in this case, the course was related to healing. So, it's really important to kind of reflect upon your positionality. And we all dove really deep into, I started by sharing my positionality, and then the students, got to share their positionality, and it's really gets pretty personal. So I think it's almost like a cone of silence in a way for our classroom. It's like there's this level of confidentiality, especially when you're in a circle, and it's like what happens in the circle stays in the circle. And so, and then the experiential learning part outside of the classroom, because this inside is still, when we're doing that, it's an experiential learning process. But the outside the classroom, we went to Bannock Point Petroforms and, went to that sacred site there, which is such an important site for Indigenous people, especially, Anishinaabe Medewin teachings associated with that site. And then we also camped from Friday to Sunday at David and Cheryl Blacksmith's Sundance ceremony at Spruce Woods Provincial Park. So that was really a special time that we had camping. And so the land-based component of this course was made possible through the Experiential Learning Fund, and then additional tuition fees from the students. So combined, we had that budget to work with. And I first started offering this course, whenever, I can't remember what you said it was, the first year.
2012.
Yeah, so we got our initial funding for that and bought a bunch of tents and some camping stuff and things like that, and food. And I used that, for subsequent iterations of the course. And then, last year we needed a little bit more camping supplies, et cetera, and then the food, and because it can get a bit pricey. And so this past year we used the ELF funds and tuition fees that the students contributed. We used those to buy food, tobacco. We went through quite a bit of tobacco because wherever we go, we're offering tobacco, at the Sundance, at the Petroforums, et cetera, and giving tobacco to elders and traditional people that we meet and ask information from, whatever. And then also some camping equipment that we needed, and then to give a donation to the lodge. We donated to the lodge, and that's the way. And so I went through this kind of quickly because I'm always conscious of time. If I get going, I'm just like, blah, blah. But I think this was really, this course is one of my favorite courses. I love it so much. And I'm so glad that Walby was here to share some things, because I know it's a busy day for her too. So maybe you want to just share a few words, whatever you want to talk about with the course.
Okay. Well, my name is Mary Capo. I am a third-year sociology student here at the UW, and I was first introduced to this course through another course that Mark was teaching, Indigenous Spirituality, and he was kind of like advertising it throughout the last few classes. So I thought, that sounds pretty cool. I'll look into that. I wasn't really serious about it at first, but the more that I thought about it, the more I thought this might be good for me for my journey. A prominent theme throughout my degree has been identity and my positionality as an Indigenous person. And I grew up in the city my whole entire life, back and forth between Edmonton and Winnipeg. So I never really experienced that connection to culture and land in the way that I would like to. And for me, it's kind of hard to find those ceremonies and people who know people and, those types of resources. So I was kind of iffy about, I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
I was feeling a little iffy about accessing that through an academic institution. However, I was like, you know what? This might be the opportunity, the only opportunity that I have that's accessible to me. And I know that this will open more doors and I'll be able to meet more people to eventually establish a connection for myself and experience like my culture. And so I was like, I'll just take it. So I did, and I'm very grateful that I did. It didn't feel like a classroom. Mark was really good at facilitating us and kind of just like starting a conversation, and then we all just like, so it didn't feel like I was in an academic institution. I felt like I was sitting with a group of friends, just hanging out. And this was really important for me because I realized that this opportunity was an opportunity for us students to experience learning that wasn't exclusive to the university, and that it was an opportunity for us to learn from each other. And I realized that when I was learning a lot of things from my peers and teaching them things as well. One of the things that I can think of was we were talking about the Sundance ceremony and how we needed skirts and they needed to be to the ground, and a lot of my classmates didn't have ribbon skirts. And I thought, well, I know how to make some, so I could teach a class, I guess. And so I taught a few of the ladies in our class how to make ribbon skirts, and I thought like this will be with them for life. And all the other things that we learn in this class as well will be with us forever. And I was super excited, but also really nervous to go to the Sundance because, as I said, I grew up in the city and it was my first time camping. And Mark was like, if you need to bring your son, like bring him. Like, it's not just for you students, it's for everyone, and there's going to be lots of people there. So I thought, okay, it'll be a good experience for my son. I have the resources to give him opportunities that I have. And so just seeing the way that this knowledge can be mobilized inside and outside of the classroom is extremely important. And yeah, it was just a wonderful experience. My son learned a lot. I learned a lot. And just the experience in itself was, honestly, there's no words to describe it. It was truly like an experience that really changed my perspective on education and just my perspective of the world in general. So, me going to Mark for the opportunity, and hope that you keep hosting this class because it's an amazing class.
Thanks so much. Gosh. See, I'm gonna get emotional because I love hearing these beautiful testimonies, and it makes me feel good about what I do. This is what it's all about, right? So even my learning philosophy is that we are all in this together, right? Remember, I was talking about this, and so that we're learning from each other, and it's amazing. Like it's not it's the circle format where we are similar to what Walby was talking about there. And then we ended up our closing circle. We went to Hildona Park and just had a feast there and shared our final thoughts and stuff out, on the land, sitting on the grass and that. And I gotta say, her son was such a cool kid. The guy was amazing. We were calling him like a little old man because he seemed to be so old in his knowledge or in his ways of being. It was so cool. And so this I think was an important part too, is to allow opportunity for other family members to show up and be part of it. We had lots of camping equipment, and others brought their own their tents and whatnot too. So I think that with the experiential learning fund, it really helped us make this cover a lot of the costs that come into play. It's not cheap to feed a bunch of hungry students, and of course me, I ate twice as much. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you very much, Myla, for organizing this. And of course, thank you to the EL Fund for helping me to run this course. So a little preamble to my presentation. There's a thought that always stayed with me when I was doing my postdoc. I was doing it in the US, and my postdoc mentor was a professor at Columbia, but did her PhD in Canada at McGill in Montreal, was telling me that she felt that Canadian university trained better scholars, but that American university better professionalize their graduate students, right? That make them more prepared for the job market and for the job of being an academic afterwards. And that kind of stayed with me, this thought. And then it reminded me of where I learned first about not just doing research, but about being an academic was when I was doing my PhD. And I did this course at Concordia University that was called Discourse of the Body. And the instructor had proposed, well, how about at the end of term, we have a little informal symposium where we can all share our research during the course and whatnot. It's like, okay, fine, let's do that. That'll be fun. But then the students in the class, we really kind of went above and beyond. We decided, no, we're not going to make it a little informal symposium. We're going to make it a full-fledged public event, like an actual symposium that we can put on our CV, and we are going to organize it, right? So our instructor was a little bit blown away because of the amount of labor, extra labor that we put in doing that. But that was one of the best moment during my graduate studies was the symposium, right? So basically we were doing everything. We're taking care of seeking financing, which obviously, thankfully, my students don't have to do that because the graduate program and EL Fund is providing the funding for a symposium. But so we did everything. We were finding the funding, putting a call for paper, doing publicity, inviting keynote speakers, putting posters together, posting them all across the city, doing communication, and then being respondent on each other's paper, and then presenting the paper, putting the programs together, organizing the panels into cluster that work together. So basically learning not just to be scholars, but learning what it means as an academic to curate the production of knowledge, right? To put together an academic event, right? That not only was a great learning opportunity for us, but was also part of our portfolio. So now we had this presentation we did at the conference that was on our CV, and we're also co-organizer of a public event that was on our CV, right? So that's pretty much basically the thought behind our EL Fund is to help us do exactly that for the students in our Capstone seminar. So the Capstone seminar from DMA in Cultural Studies is more often than not the last course that students take before they end their degree, right? So we created this course. We run it for the first time last year. I'm teaching it again this year. It started yesterday, actually. And the idea is that since we're not a thesis-based program, and I'm a very big fan of intensive course-based master's program for a reason that I'm not going to get into right now because it's not relevant to this. But we don't have a thesis option. So the idea was to create a course that would allow students to have at least one kind of personal big project that they could leave their degree with and have as part of their portfolio. For example, for those who wants to pursue doctoral studies afterwards, that's an interesting, kind of stepping stone towards short applications, whatnot, to have a project, a research program that they started to work on for their degree. And if not, even for those who are not intending to do doctoral studies after, was still a good opportunity for them to end their degree on a project that really, really mattered to them, right? And again, like what I want to do with this course, I don't want it simply to be students in the classroom giving feedback to each other at different degrees of development of their project, which of course is what we do in the classroom, right? But what we do in the classroom as well, aside from that, is to do that all that organizational work towards this symposium, this public symposium that they will be co-organizer of, that they can write that on their CV, that they're going to do a presentation at the symposium and learn how it is to participate to an academic event, but an academic event that they have organized themselves collaboratively, right? So they're responsible for doing, everything, and we do it as a group. I am also part of the organizing committee with them, right? So we're gonna, put together a call for paper, we produce poster, we organize the panels, we invite panel chairs for each of our panels. We invite keynote speakers that are a way for students to be exposed to like more advanced graduate studies or the work from young scholars, but it's also a way to attract a crowd, let's be honest, right? We're gonna find like really great, interesting people that we thought would be good to attract a crowd, because as I said, we don't want it to just be this kind of like little informal symposium where we book a classroom and just speak among each other, presenting papers to each other, right? We want to attract a crowd. We want, even though it's like late July that we're doing it, which is not the best time to have a symposium, but that's just the schedule we have. But we managed to have like a very interesting crowd. A lot of people were not part of the class that came to hear our students and also to hear our keynote speakers who were last year. Adrienne Huard, who is like a famous local drag king, but also was at the time completing their doctoral degree in Indigenous Studies at University of Manitoba. And then our closing keynote was like a new faculty member at the university, Dr. Leah Caragano from the history department, who presented about our research on popular culture and settler colonialism in Hawaii. So now the course is started. We're going to do that again with the students. I just presented the idea to them yesterday. They look like excited about putting together that symposium. We're going to discuss with them some of the same ideas, like getting keynote speakers that they select. They organize the vote around it. They like build the committee to decide how and who we're going to be inviting. They're going to be contacting those folks. They're going to be writing the letters of invitation. They're really like doing like all of the groundwork of what it is to organize an academic event. Right? So so in a nutshell, that's the idea. That's what we're doing with the EL Fund, and I'm very extremely grateful that we have that.
I'm really glad to be joined by M. Penner and Caitlin Kolutu, who were part of last year's writing internship course. I'll just give a brief introduction to the writing internship. We've been going for about 5 years, and I did a tally yesterday, and I think we've, with Nyala's amazing help, Nyala has done a wonderful job working on this course. 28 distinct institutions have hosted students over the last 5 years, and we're still growing. We have 10 students out in placements right now, entering their first week of the 8-week placement. We had 10 placements last year that was funded by the Experiential Learning Fund 10 the year before and 10 the year before. It all started because at some point in the rhetoric department, a faculty member or a group of faculty members decided to build a course called the Writing Internship. But it just sat there, as far as I know, and wasn't used at all until a student approached me and said, I found this course, do you think we can do this? And this was in 2019, and we did just a placement here, a placement there for a couple of years until, we just decided to launch this course. We use the funds solely for honoraria for the students. So that really helped us solidify the writing internship course, the experiential learning opportunity for our students over the past 2 years. The course now has legs. It's yeah, we're turning students away. Yeah, like I sadly had to turn students away this year, but we're working on expanding it slowly. So hopefully 12 maybe next year, and hopefully 15 by 2026. But there's a huge amount of labor on Nyala's part that goes into each of those placements. So for each and every placement, we're very grateful. Pass it over to M. The course is only as good as the experiences. That's true, but it's.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Em. I did my internship with the Uniter, which is based here in the university. And I really wasn't planning on doing the writing internship. I had contacted Andy, I think it was like in mid-April of last year, and I was just curious about getting more experience in the field, if you know of any opportunities. And he was like, we have this perfect opportunity that you can do right here as a course. And so I think it was, yeah, I had maybe like 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks before it started. So it was pretty quick. But we had decided on the Uniter as a pretty good fit for me. And I had expressed my interest in editing before in classes. And so I was super like excited to do some editing at the Uniter. But it ended up being a lot more writing, which I wasn't expecting. But I had such a fun time with being able to write articles. So by the end of the internship, I actually had 3 published articles on the Uniter website, which was so crazy and so exciting. And they all focused on mainly queer topics. So that was really exciting because that's kind of my primary area of focus that I prefer to talk about. And yeah, I got to meet a lot of really cool people. I got to interview subjects for my articles, and I got to actually write them. And then I also got to be part of the editing process as well, which was so cool to see kind of from start to finish the whole creation of the article and the publishing. So yeah, it was such an amazing opportunity, and I got to learn so much about writing in like CP style, which I was very used to, obviously writing in an academic style. So it was a big change, but it really like exercised my brain in a fun way, which I really enjoyed. It was just so much fun. And that experience kind of led to another job opportunity that I had in the fall until kind of until April, which focused primarily on editing. So it just was really cool to have that experience that really broadened my horizons. That wasn't just editing that I was focused on. It was cool to kind of have that experience that I wasn't necessarily expecting. And yeah, just see like how many options and how many possibilities there are in the field. So I just really enjoyed it, and it was so much fun.
Hi, my name's Caitlin. I was a part of the writing internship opportunity last year as well. I was lucky enough to get a placement with the only publishing house on the list. So I was with Ape Press. During my time there is still present. I'm still with them, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But as I started out there, we sort of played with the idea of creating this sort of manuscript on how like the process of book publishing, and that way I can get really familiar with the processes. But then another exciting opportunity popped up where I was able to actually write for their webpage on their website. I'm actually in charge of their book supplements pages. So for each of the recent publications, I believe this started early last year, just before I got on to work with them. So essentially they have a whole section of their page where they create little like behind the scenes information, and they'll record certain sections of like book launches and things like that. And I get to add them to the pages. And then I'm lucky enough that they've entrusted me to like write all the blurbs out for those specific pages. So I am essentially I'm in charge of the book supplement page, which is an incredible opportunity. As that came to a close, they presented keeping me on casually. And so I've been working with them consistently since last summer to just keep those pages updated, and I'm still in charge of those pages. I'm also lucky enough to possibly have a full-time position lined up for me once I graduate this June. We are waiting on some grants, so that's not fully set in stone, but there will be a part-time guaranteed job, if not full-time, if we get the grants. So that was an amazing opportunity that the writing internship has provided me. I have long been interested in book publishing. I actually am very interested in editing as well. Sort of within the book publishing industry specifically is where I really wanted to get opportunities, and I'm just so grateful to have had this because it was the only book publisher on the list. So I got in early on the sign up sheet, and I was able to pick them, luckily. But yeah, no, now I have a possible job set up for me after I graduate. And hopefully that'll set me up for future opportunities, looking at master's degrees in publishing at SFU and things like that. So I'm just so blessed to have had the experience to start off while I'm already in university, and so lucky that they decided to keep me on. And just, yeah, overall, again, I was going into it, I think, expecting a more editing like opportunity, but wasn't expecting to be in charge of a whole section of their website, which is truly just awesome. I'm so happy that they trusted me with that, and I'm just, yeah, enjoying continuing working with them, and I see myself continuing to work with them long after I graduate, hopefully.
And that's it. So thank you very much, Nyala.
Videos and these presentations. I was surprised at, I guess, how much just the happenstance things enriched all of the projects, either just bringing family or things like just run-ins with experts, or I guess also potential employment at the end. Those are all really great things. And yeah, I think we had a good range of projects this year, and I hope folks enjoyed listening to what students were up to and how instructors facilitated all of these different opportunities with the funding we were able to provide. And thank you to all of the folks that presented and the folks that also helped to vet this round of projects. And I will present those next year along with some of you, hopefully, and hopefully, yeah, we can get together again.